All right, welcome back to another Startup Junkies podcast. My name is Davis McIntyre. I'm podcast producer, and be sure to like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff to check up with us weekly. I'm joined today by my co-host Jeff Amaron, the usual face, and we have a new face today, Grace. Grace, how you doing?
Doing well, thank you.
Yeah, it's good to be on, Davis. Grace, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it is my pleasure today to introduce our guest, Rahul Chauhan. He is Group Managing Director of Foresight Digital. Rahul, how are you doing today?
I'm well. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. We are glad to have you. So if you could you elaborate a little bit on what Foresight does?
Yeah, absolutely. So Foresight Digital is an organization specializing in digital marketing. We provide training and workshop sessions to startups, as well as global digital marketing services across a various amount of capabilities for scale-up organizations. So, i.e., those who have who are sort of Series A, Series B, or Series C.
Well, tell us a little bit more that's great background about your origin story. What led you to Foresight, and give us a little bit of that history. We always like to get a little bit of the X-Men Marvel background on our guests.
Well, I commenced there's two origin stories, I suppose. The first is mine. So I commenced my journey to Foresight. I started at client side quite some time ago, and so that was at Endeavour. And then moving from there, I then moved to a small Australian startup and worked there for a little while, and then went into retail marketing. And from there, I was one of the first employees at Airtasker, which is now a fairly large Australian global scale-up organization. And in fact, has quite some presence across both Australia, the UK, and the US. Most recently, I think from the US, they purchased TaskRabbit, or rather acquired them. After that, I went to Vistaprint, which is an e-commerce organization, and started my e-commerce journey there, stayed there, and then finally, after a few years, thought, well, out of the three things, in terms of marketing that one does, which would be both client, private, and government, I haven't really tried, client, private, and agency. I haven't really tried agency side. So I, for the first time, moved to an agency, Omnicom, and worked there for a little while, then went to another agency, Visium, which is part of the Dentsu group, then went to another agency, Publicis. So effectively has pretty much done most of the agency groups globally. And then from there, I moved to Foresight Digital. When we first started, when I first started at Foresight Digital, we were purely based out of one city. And my commencement at Foresight was, I think, 2 months before the global pandemic. And a few days before our city went into what was one of the world's largest lockdowns, we decided to completely pivot. And instead of only hiring those and working from a particular office, we decided that we would literally pivot the organization, and we did overnight into an online organization. What I mean by that is 95% work from home. And we were scaling at the time because, of course, as you know, a number of organizations or global clients were moving their media dollars and marketing dollars away from offline media to online media. And so we're getting a lot of inquiry, and we just didn't have the requisite or the right type of staff in the city that we were at. So we decided, let's work from home, let's start hiring nationally, and then let's start hiring internationally, because it doesn't matter where you live. I think it matters what you bring to the table. And from there on, we've never looked back. We've become a completely distributed organization across Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Chicago, London, Auckland in New Zealand. And that's sort of a story in a quick nutshell.
What was that pivot like? Like, what would you say the hardest part was, going, a traditional business format, then completely switching to full online or pretty much full remote?
That's a great question. I mean, it depends on the lens. I think we were always set up to operate in a manner which, transparency is a huge part of our culture. And so for us, all the systems, the platforms, the project management tools, the manner in which we engage was always cloud-based. So from a delivery perspective, it was business as usual. But I think from a cultural perspective, particularly the culture as regards to servicing clients, I think that was really challenging. I think clients themselves are so used to this face-to-face interaction where, it's only when you're in the room that you're perceived as delivering value. That took a bit of time, but they themselves were forced to behave in the same way. It was this forced digitization. And so I think they themselves started to perceive that interactions did not have to be face-to-face. So I think that was a little tough. But I think the thing that was the most difficult is culture. How do you build culture when so much of your culture is face-to-face interactions, reading emotion? You're in marketing, so it is at the intersection of art and science. How do you do that? And I think that was really difficult. So internally for our people, not everybody, we scaled pretty quickly, and not everybody in the team that had started or had been at Foresight for, let's say 6 months, even before that, a year before that stayed. I think a lot of people found it really difficult because it's lonely, right? You wake up, you cross your hallway, you walk into your office, if you have one, and you start working. So that was really difficult. It took time. And to be honest, it's only, I'd say, a year and a half later that we have this team that has this right understanding of, how do you have this online empathy and culture, whilst at the same, being across a variety of different geographies and feeling like you're part of this one engine, this one entity. That's been really difficult. I think it's only been now that we have this team that's ready to continue on, rather than, have to worry about attrition or, are we reading people in the right way? Is the value exchange equal? So one of the things that we did to counteract that, which I think was probably a first, is we have these benefits. So most organizations, I think, can probably agree or align with this, but when we gave up this, this beautiful office and whatnot, of course you reduce your operating expense. So that's great. But then you have to make a decision. Do you keep that money or do you give it back, to those who you're working with? And that's what we decided to do. So instead of pocketing the OpEx with savings realization, we created these value and support benefits to help create that mutual culture and exchange. So, for example, even doesn't matter where you are in the world, if you commence at Foresight, we'll fly you in for onboarding. Then we fly you in once a quarter into Melbourne, which is, I suppose our origin, but we have more people in other cities now. Everybody has this increased professional development budget. We pay for their phone, their internet, we pay for their healthy life. So that's not like a gym membership. That's a do what you want to feel healthy membership. And we provide towards that, food at home so that you're not just snacking on Cheetos, like you're having something that's healthy during the day. We set up the home office with all the furniture, and that doesn't even have to be furniture because you may already have it. Paintings and carpet, things like that. Every year, everybody gets together and goes away. We provide life assistance, financial services like tax return assistance, salary packaging assistance. We have a Foresight Marketing Academy that I mentioned before, where we train and develop startups, and those were even at seed level, so founders. And if you participate in that, so it's not a part of your job, but if you participate in that, we pay you for it. And then one of the best things I think we had is we understand that it's only with travel that you grow, typically with exchanging, different cultural understanding, that you grow as a marketer. And so after 12 months at Foresight, we pay for you to take a working holiday. You can work from anywhere in the world. You still can, but you might want to work from Machu Picchu, for example. So go and do that, and so you don't have to draw down your annual leave. So it was only by virtue of pain and iteration that we came to understanding how to deliver those things, which then goes back to your former point. How hard was it? It was really hard. We had to find the solutions to be able to then pivot from face-to-face to online. And this is an example.
No, absolutely. I think that's a great approach. And I I think that's kind of the trend we've started to see is more companies try to take these benefit or incentive packages like you were describing to better the remote, work-life balance and try to navigate. That's a very, very hard thing to navigate, but it sounds like Foresight is doing a fantastic job.
They do, but I don't know if our industry collectively is doing it well enough. I think, there are these large organizations that penalize you for not living in the city of choice.
Right.
And because you live in a city where perhaps the cost of living is slightly less, they pay you less. We don't believe in that. We believe in a global standard. You don't get paid any less if you live in the country than if you live in the city with us. I think you should benefit. If you want to live in the country, go ahead. Why should you lose, remuneration or compensation because of your choice? So I think we do need collectively to get better. And I'm not going to name organizations that I know of that penalize, but I think there are some very large global organizations that do that. And
Rahul,
I disagree with that.
The one thing that your approach, I think, acknowledges is there's a worldwide war for talent to get and retain the best people. And given that you've taken this very forward-looking view of all that, I would say sort of associate-centered view of how to bring and add members to your team. What's been the impact in terms of the kind of talent you've been able to attract, and just give the overall sort of some of the outcomes by virtue of the evolved culture and standards that you've set?
Oh, absolutely. The impact has been that typically we now have far more senior talent. So we have more, for example, we have more people, and I'm sure this is the same across the board. We have more people who have, more than 6 years or 7 years experience than we do who have less than 6 years or 7 years experience. That's the first thing. So I think typically, the focus is as much on IQ as it is on EQ. And I think that's really, really important. The ability to deliver something, read the room, manage outcomes, your own emotional regulation, etc., typically comes with time and seniority. And so we've found that we are in fact attracting and have had to pay for more senior talent. So our for example, our overhead, so remuneration has of course increased accordingly. I think the other thing that's happened is, one thing I'm really, really proud of, we're 70% female. We're female founded as well, but I think that's really great, which is typically the antithesis of a lot of agencies. One of the great things that we found that this was able to do, and from talent, is we were able to open up to a lot more different cultures. So, though we don't necessarily identify, our staff by, hey, where are you from, or what's your background, as a self-reporting, we have 11 different cultural backgrounds, at least, that work for our organization. So I think what's effectively happened, in that scope, that war for talent, is we've had to think outside of what is your ideal candidate versus what is the candidate that's available that will deliver in this new paradigm. The ideal candidate was somebody that could, maybe they're really quick, they're technically competent, they deliver work fast. I think that's all great. But if you're not able to then engage with someone at the other end of the screen, take them on the journey, be transparent with how you do so, grow them, then all your technical talent is wasted because there's no saliency. You're not able to communicate the value you're delivering. You're effectively just lines on a Word doc, or you're just purchasing media anonymously. And so we found that we spend a lot more time in the recruitment process, a lot more stages. I think, let's say before there were maybe 3 face-to-face, we now have like 5 of them, because we need to get the right talent. Because of course the impact as well is that, it is so difficult to find, you're so right, Jeff, it's so difficult to find talent that the time you invest in that talent, if you make a wrong decision, which we all do, the impact on the team is far greater now than it was before, because it takes a longer time to replace that person. So yeah, that's what we found.
I guess a question I had for you, kind of going off of this as well, is in this digital space, how do you talk about keeping up a good culture in between your employees, but how do you keep good communication as well? because, it's hard to kind of what you were saying, communicate the value that you bring. So how do you ensure that like the people that you're working with understand there's just good communication channels?
This is a great question, Grace. So we every morning, irrespective of where you're domiciled or where you are, we have a check-in, a stand-up. So the whole team gets together and goes through, these are our priorities for the day. So there's transparency to start with. So effectively 9 a.m. Australian Eastern, daylight time, we all get together. We have a quick 15-minute check-in based on the priorities, the engagement. We then move to that's an individual check-in. So everybody goes through quickly. And then what we do is we have a collective team. Here are the priorities for the team from a professional development perspective, from a value creation perspective, and from a here's the things we just want to achieve this week personally perspective. We use a project management tool called Notion, which is for us, I would imagine it's kind of like our home base. On that, we track everything live. So, and clients have access to it too. So for example, if you're a client of ours, you can go into your what would effectively be your internal Wikipedia page that we create, where you can look at, all of the different engagements that we're undertaking on your behalf. You can look at, any of the different assets that you've shared with us. You're able to understand all of the work that's happening live because you can see the delivery, and then we update things as well, so that you're able to factor, well, this was supposed to take 5 hours, it took 6 hours, and you can see commentary around that. You can identify any of the reports that we've generated, and everyone can see that. So transparency is a part, and having things that are less about IP within an individual's mind and more about collectively having access to all of the IP from an individual's mind, which is documented, is incredibly important. And there's some of the things we do. We also have a knowledge base and training. So I think we must have 800, 900 pieces of content, which forms part of our knowledge base across all of the different capabilities. So irrespective, you might be an SEO technical specialist, but you're able to then access, well, what does paid digital and SEM or search or whatever it might be. What are they doing currently, and what are the new trends that are happening there? And if I'm interested, should I have a look there? Or analytics. So I think this cross collaborative approach of here's the things that are happening in our patch, that's really interesting as well. I think, and engaging to help people come along the journey. We typically have weekly training sessions. So for example, one of our head of digital sits on the programmatic council, and so every number of weeks they will have training sessions with clients. But even if that client isn't your client at Foresight, you're still welcome to attend that training session. So you're able to have exposure across outside of your category that you're servicing. So there's some of the things that we try to do. And you have we do of course get together on a monthly basis twice, depending on what city you're in. And every Friday, we have the weekly wind down and things of that nature, which I'm sure most organizations do, which just helps to collectively do that. I think one of the other great things that we do is we have a monthly roundtable. So there's two parts to it. The first is, what did we do well? What could we do better? And what do we really need to change? And so everybody effectively goes around the room, the entire organization, and it's a safe space. And they just say, look, here's the things we didn't deliver on. These are the things that we're making mistakes on. And we find solutions every month. It doesn't matter what your level of seniority is. Everybody is held accountable. And then we have the second part of that is just, here's how we're feeling. Because again, as much as you think that you can read the room or you can look at someone at the other end of the screen, you don't know what's happening in their life when they step outside their office. You don't know the pressures that are happening. And so oftentimes we talk about that. How are things going in your lives? And is there anything that the team could do to support that? And I think, of course, when you're new, you're probably not going to share that as much. But when you're spending, in excess of 40, 50 hours a week together delivering, and your only tie is this image, on your laptop, then you do start to create culture. And, we have these breakout rooms as well on our Slack So we use Slack, of course, and we have, like, I mean, I'm looking at them right now, and some of them are pretty interesting. There's a coffee channel, and there's a pets channel where, I think we're a bit pet experts, to be honest. And so we share these sausage dog photos and pug photos. Pug photos are mine, but yeah, we do that. And, we have programmatic channels. So if anyone's interested in what's going on in the programmatic field, people just randomly say, hey guys, I'm just nerding out on programmatic at the moment. Here's what I found. So we have these random channels that people create. You can create whichever one you want, and people just sort of chit chat on that. So there's also a way that whilst you're working or you're in flow, you can kind of, get a ping, or someone taps you on the shoulder and say, hey, does anyone want to have a coffee right now? And so, we do that online. So that's sort of the way that we've tried to create this culture and keep people both visible of what's happening in each other's lives from an output perspective, but also from a personal perspective.
Well, it sounds like
I hope that answered your question, Grace.
No, that was good. I mean, it's again sort of a fantastic narration of the kind of robust culture that you've built that engages your team members in more than just the work at hand, but kind of the whole person, which is, I think, pretty fantastic. And as you were going through that, I was thinking, well, I wonder how some of that translates to the sort of experiences you have with your clients. And I think it'd be helpful to our audience, which is comprised of entrepreneurs and innovators in organizations of all sizes. How have you found your experience to be different between working with a relatively early stage startup, a scale up, or a large enterprise?
It's a great question, Jeff. Thank you for asking. I think ultimately there's three things. They all have a core problem. Typically, it's their challenger brands, right? They're not most of the organizations we work with. They're trying to achieve three things effectively, right? Well, overall, it's growth, but that's by value of defining their value. It's by value of ensuring that the culture of their organization remains true, and it's by virtue, I think, of ensuring that the product that they're creating or they're pushing to market, continues to engage. And so if I think about the connective tissue between all three, it really is about actionable outcomes. It doesn't matter how large you are if you can't deliver something to your customer, and then be able to measure it, be able to iterate on it, and be able to ensure that there's a meaningful value exchange, and then you might not be doing the right thing. So for us, the way that we typically engage with organizations of all sizes are across four strategic benefits. The first is scaling their marketing and their leads at pace. I think that's really important. The competitive pressures now, from our perspective, not everybody's, dictate that moving at pace will ensure that you don't necessarily move, you're not necessarily ahead, but at least you keep up. That's the first thing. The second thing is ensuring that there's a clear pathway to hitting their growth. So irrespective of whether it's Salesforce or whether it might be a Lifetile or whether it might be Hungry or other clients we have, they all need to find a way to ensure that there's a clear pathway to hitting their growth, and part of that is basing whatever their forecasts are on real data. Then the third thing is ensuring that scale is correct. Like, what is the team that they're building, and is that marketing team that they're building trained up? Do they understand the most relevant, recent, and prioritized activities and tasks for their particular output? And the third is, I think, what I mentioned, focusing on what makes that product or that brand brilliant. You can't be everything to everyone. So be really clear, what is it that you are? And that, I think, is the same problem that Netflix has, that, the two guys working in the garage creating the next iteration of something that's going to change the world have as well. What makes you brilliant? So we typically like to approach organizations from that methodology, and then that methodology is then unpacked into three key pillars. So leadership, it doesn't matter how large you are either. It's leadership and operations, acquisition, and then nurture, retention, and advocacy. So, for example, leadership and operations could entail anything from growth marketing strategy, your brand messaging, hiring guidance. How do you hire the right people? It might be your best mate that you're hiring in return for a few coffees a week to help with your startup, or it might be, the global CMO of someone that you're trying to attract to your organization. So that's leadership and operations. From an acquisition perspective, it's then how do you ensure you're prospecting correctly for lead generation? How do you qualify? Is that the right customer? Is that a customer? Is that a customer that you're going to engage with for a longer period of time? How do you then ensure that you deliver whatever you need to deliver across the right channels? And that, as I mentioned, could be paid digital, SEO, affiliate, content, creative, whatever it might be. And then finally, how are you measuring success? How are you nurturing the customer that you've converted for a lifetime value? So, what are you doing across your CRM or database? And we've had customers, large ones, weirdly, and their CRM initially was, it's a Google spreadsheet. Like, okay, cool, let's try that. That's if that's what works for you right now, cool. It's probably not scalable, but how do we iterate that? And there's nothing wrong with it. But how do you grow from that? So there's that, or how do you create advocacy referral programs? How are you measuring the things that matter and not everything you think should matter? And finally, how are you keeping people engaged with the content that you're providing? So I think that's really important. Content is not stuff you see on social. For us, content is any meaningful interaction, and that could be by virtue of entertainment, education, upskilling, things that you're providing your customer for free rather than for an ask. So that's how we go about it, from both to a small organization with 5 people that's just trying to raise cap, to global organizations that we service.
I think that was a fantastic answer, Rahul, to that question. And so usually as we tend to wrap up our podcast, we like to answer, or we like to ask you this question here. If you could go back before Foresight Digital, say that's 10 years, 15 years, what advice would you give your younger self before, traveling down the journey that you have?
Oh, that's existential.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here's one. There's probably a lot of advice. I've made so many mistakes, but I've always learned from them. There's 2 bits. The first is you learn more from what you say no to than what you say yes to. You're defined more from what you say no to. I think that's really important. The world will give you so many opportunities. It's about thinking about which is the right one. And I think the second piece of advice that I would always give, which kind of connects to the first, is there's always another perspective. I think those 2 bits of advice, gosh, had I known those 10 years ago, I'm sure I'd be a billionaire. But I didn't. So there you have it. For anyone who is in their 20s, there you go. There's a free bit of info for you.
That's great. Rahul, thank you so much for coming on. And the way we kind of finally land the plane is, where can people find out more about your company or to connect with you if they want to have more conversations?
Oh, thank you. Absolutely. I mean, you can look at foresightdigital.com.au if you'd like to find out more about our organization. You don't even have to contact us. We have a lot of information there that might be just available for you to do what you want. So we have a lot of information about how you go about things, and we just free IP that we're more than happy to provide you. So check out our website. Alternatively, if you like, you can just search for me on LinkedIn. I respond to every message personally. There's never anyone too small, too big. I'm more than happy to engage with you. And if you'd like some advice, we're more than happy to engage with you. As I noted, we're not just a digital agency. We also provide training and development. So please feel free to reach out. I will respond to you no matter what. So
that's outstanding.
Rahul Chauhan on LinkedIn.
Thanks for coming on. We know it was very early in the morning over in Australia, and we really appreciate you coming on. And best of luck in everything that comes next for you and your company.
Thank you so much, Davis, Grace, Jeff. It was a real pleasure. I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Have a good one.